But I came into office with the overheard comment of a colleague, "Oh, but we just had a woman," ringing in my ears. Not long after I turned over the gavel to Arthur Link, my husband said, "Well, was it worth all the pain and strain of being president of the OAH?" And my reply was a story that I know you've all heard at some point about that legendary Charlestonian who was tarred and feathered and ridden out of town on a rail. And he came home and said, "If it hadn't been for the honor of it, I would just as soon have stayed at home." That anecdote reflected a crisis-ridden year which I spent trying to ride the unruly tiger called the Organization of American Historians. The Secretary-Treasurer was retiring. The organization was broke, maybe even dead. There was a profound difference between the President and the Executive Board on the one hand and the Executive Secretary on the other as to who could speak for the organization in such places as congressional committees. The editor of the journal was retiring, and it was clear to me very early that there was quite a different perception on the part of many members of the board and many members of the staff as to what the organization was all about. Nobody had warned me of any of this when I was nominated, nor did anyone, as far as I know, or any written document define the president's duties, or for that matter, what were the qualifications for the office. Was it scholarship? Was it service to the organization? Was it presumed administrative ability? Or all of the above? Tradition had it, of course, that you will provide a properly presidential address. But there was no discussion of what that address should be about. Was it to prove that the person was a proper scholar, a sort of advanced PhD oral, as it were? Or should it be connected with the state of the discipline or the state of the organization? Laissez-faire seemed to rule. So when I was asked to speak on this panel, I began to reflect about things that I should have reflected about 23 years ago, as I reluctantly pondered the invitation to be president. Though I had been a member of the Mississippi Valley Association at the time that the name was changed, I didn't know much about the history of the organization. If I had, I would have known that it was founded not by academics at all, but by archivists who wanted to improve their position in the world and who particularly wanted to improve the teaching of American history. The first lady had plenty of crisis periods. The first president said he was sorry that he couldn't afford to come to the meeting. It was too far away. And furthermore, he didn't think the organization had a chance of surviving. His skepticism was well justified because the AHA was very concerned about competition. And they gave the report that if the Americans insisted that they had to have a separate organization, it should be a sub-organization of the AHA, modeled on the Pacific Coast branch. A businessman and an archivist leaped into the breach, and with a preemptive strike, they said, "No, we don't want to join the AHA at all." And of course, in time, the AHA didn't even answer the mail when it came from us. But they managed to put together a program on short notice, and thus the beginning. After another crisis, nearly half a century later, is diplomatically described by a very interesting article in the JAH in 1967. The author wrote, "A transition in the business office caused a period of unsatisfactory handling of finances. The organization that culminated in finances of the organization that culminated in the disappearance of several $100,000. A problem that was amicably solved without legal action." He does not explain what this amicable solution was, but he goes on to write, "Contention among members on the issue of racial discrimination and about the proposal to change the name, plus disillusion with the business problems, coincided with the need to find a new editor of the review, as the journal was then called. It was, he said, a most critical period. It sounded exactly like my time. My own journal gives evidence of another hard time, not so much from crisis as from lassitude. I wrote that I'd been bored to tears at the meeting of others saying that he had been a member for 20 years and he'd never seen such a dull board meeting. In all my early meetings, I was astonished at how little the organization was doing. Once we spent 2 hours debating whether obituaries should be printed in the journal. A couple of members were noted to take a refreshing little nap. I'm ashamed to say now that I didn't undertake to start a revolution rather than risk death from boredom. I can see in retrospect that by the time I was president, the organization was on the verge of 20 years of considerable change in which we, who were supposed to be the leaders, were only dimly aware. And with a certain amount of starting and stopping, the ensuing 23 years have indeed witnessed a revolution. And look at the difference in size, for example, of the program this year from what it was in 1984. I begin to suspect, on the basis of this very limited research, that a careful study of this century since 1907 would identify a series of cycles, smooth sailing alternating with rough weather, periods when almost nothing changed, followed by periods such as the present one, when we're in the midst of redefining the nature and purpose of the organization. One repeated cyclical subject is that habit of cooperating with the schools to help to improve the teaching of American history, a subject which was on the first platform and has appeared very periodically ever since. I suppose the present manifestation is the enthusiastic endorsement of the present board of work with community colleges. One of the oddest things about historians is the lack of attention to our own history. It's odd that this organization never seems to have addressed the question, what do you need in a president? Should it be simply a reward for what is generally agreed to be good scholarship? Should it be for innovative thinking about the future of the discipline, or of the profession, or of the humanities? Or should it recognize a commitment to diversity, or all of the above? Should a president have an agenda, or is that the prerogative of the membership? Well, if the members are going to decide, how is that going to be done? One former president whom I consulted at the beginning of my term said, oh, you can't do anything in 1 year, and just accept the honor and go ahead. I was so shocked by this advice that I decided that my first task was to make sure we had a wonderful program. So I managed to persuade, and it took a lot of persuading, Ira Berlin and Dottie Ross to take this on. They set such a high standard that it has influenced, I think it has influenced program committees ever since. Then I struggled to write a presidential address, which would combine some scholarship with a general proposition about what are the things that shape what we decide to study at any given time. I've seldom seen that essay cited. It fell into a black hole. I failed utterly to find a replacement for the missing treasurer, a task which Arthur Lincoln accomplished on his first day in office. I think he found the remarkable Cullen Davis, who not only got us out of debt, but built up a reserve fund, which has been our salvation in recent crises. The search for a new editor was equally painful. So I look at my overall performance and I give myself a B-. As we continue this period of rapid change, I leave Nell Painter with a suggestion that some of these issues that I've raised here might be worth a committee or two. And from experience, I'll leave her with a warning. You don't know nothing yet, baby.